Senator Sinead Gibney, thanks for joining me today. We're going to talk about the book that your
Deputy, actually,
deputy, oh,
I'm not a senator,
apologies.
sorry. Yeah,
Okay.
no, that's no problem. So I'm a TD, so it's Deputy Sinead Gibney, but you can just call me Sinead.
Okay, Sinead, thank you so much for being with me today. And we're going to talk about the
My
book
pleasure.
that your dad wrote, and I believe you helped kind of get over the line as well. It's called In Defense of Bread. And it's a really interesting book. It challenges many assumptions that we're going to get into. And first of all, I love the title. I mean, it kind of roped me in from the beginning. Whose idea was it for the title?
So that was Dad's idea, but it's actually a bit of a kind of a jibe, I'm going to say, because obviously, so the book, I mean, it starts talking very much about populist science and comparing that to populism in politics. And one of the kind of populist scientists who Dad mentions in the book and has. Oh,
I'm so sorry. I'm not sure if that
no
was my
problem.
connection. I don't know what happened, but we can just continue.
Sure. And then the other kind of angle on it, I suppose, is I mean, the reference to bread is really important, and Dad goes into that in one of the chapters specifically because, um, by people's conceptions of ultra processed foods, when we think about ultra processed foods, I guess our brains kind of go to, heavily, sh sweetened and colored and kind of, a particular type of packaging, I think, and a particular type of product. But actually, by a lot of the food classification systems that people who are kind of in the anti-ultra processed food movement rely on, they actually categorize bread as either ultra processed or processed, and a lot of people wouldn't be aware of that. So I think that's what really Dad is trying to get at, that kind of the move against ultra processed foods really kind of captures a bit too much than it should.
Right, for sure. I think also if we could just start off, if you could give a background of your dad's kind of life and career in nutrition, the research that he did, and his kind of contribution in
Yeah,
general.
absolutely. So yeah, Dad was a really eminent scientist in his field of human nutrition. So he actually did he first studied agricultural science way back in the 70s, late 60s actually. And then he did his PhD in animal nutrition. And at the time it was almost kind of an easier journey towards human nutrition, weirdly. And so he got into that field like in the late 70s, or sorry, mid 70s really. And traveled around a bit. So he spent a bit of time in England in the University of Southampton, and then set up essentially the kind of school of nutrition, if you like, in Trinity, and then moved on to UCD closer to his retirement, where he also founded the Institute of Food and Health. And across his career, I guess he was quite passionate about public health in particular and public health advice. Epidemiology, food labeling, obesity, those were kinds of his areas of interest. And, since Dad died, people have called him, a contrarian, and certain like ways of describing, I guess, how he came at things. But most of all, Dad just really resented or just was miffed by bad science and really got
Right.
upset by public health advice that was rooted in bad science. And so I suppose why people might have thought of him as contrarian is because he just was never afraid to challenge conventional wisdom and kind of groupthink. And in particular, he had a problem with policy which penalized people. So for example, he was quite a vocal opponent to the sugar tax when it was introduced here
Mm.
in Ireland. And the reason for that is because the way he described it, the sugar tax is just like putting a band-aid on a gaping wound. It's not going to really deal with obesity. And in the meantime, it's just going to punish people in the poorer categories of society. So I believe, and I mean, maybe this is because I'm now in this kind of social justice space myself, but I do believe a lot of his kind of advice and ideas stemmed around issues around social justice, actually. So similarly, for example, he had a real issue with, like, he's no issue with organic farming for the produce of food.
Right.
But he would have an issue with any kind of claims by people within the organic lobby movement who claim that there is any additional nutritional value to an organic carrot than there is to a traditionally farmed carrot, because that's just
Mhm.
not true. Nutritionally, they are the same. There are other ways in which they're different, but they're the same as from a nutritional standpoint. You're going to get the same nutrients into your body, and you're going to pay a lot more for an organic cart normally.
Right.
So again, it's like making people feel bad about not being able to make the right choice, and he never, liked that. So and I suppose maybe, one of the ways I would contextualize this book is really in the last couple of years of his life, he got really annoyed by just how much misinformation was flowing around the concept and the terminology of ultra processed foods and these claims about ultra processed foods that were just rooted in bad science. But that ultra processed food has just become what he always described as the whipping boy. So even as we were growing up, I remember him always using that term, like carbs were the whipping boy at one stage, or sugar, or
Mm.
fat, or saturated fats, or at any given time, there is a whipping boy that policymakers and just, I suppose influencers now on the internet will blame all of the ills of our food intake on a certain category or a certain
Right.
type of food. And it's just useless. It's pointless. Like, we have to really look at these things in the round, I think.
Yeah, for sure. It's kind of like layman science, you know what I mean? And even seen on social media, like it's something the middle way or balance doesn't really get, clicks, we'll say. It's more like extreme sensational diets and excluding one food group altogether, like keto, carnivore, etc. So I think
Yeah,
the view your dad had was very evidence-based and kind of like,
exactly.
you know, middle ground, which maybe you're not going to
Yeah.
get plastered over the front page of a newspaper.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly. Yeah, it's boring, and I mean, but that's the thing is like there are no bad foods. There really aren't. And
right.
one of the examples like he uses in this is, he describes Christmas pudding. That's topical at the moment, I guess. And how people like if you think about it, Christmas pudding is, it's a really calorie dense food with, a lot of like it's a very rich food with a lot of the things that are going to have an impact on your body, I suppose. But like the reality is that we eat it once a year or maybe
Mhm.
twice a year. So like you can't categorize it as bad food. It probably would be, you could almost describe it as bad food if it was breakfast, lunch, and dinner every day for a few weeks, but it's not that. And that's the point, is that you have to consider the environment that we all live in, the fact that food is available to us in very different ways now in society.
Mm.
And then, as you say, yeah, there's just a whole lot of information flowing and kind of pressure on people to do things in certain ways, to grow your own food, for example. And I love these movements. I love that people are thinking about these things now, but they can't do it to the point where people feel bad about not being able to take part, like because a lot of us can't grow our own food because of the living circumstances we're in or financially not able to or whatever it might be.
Yeah, like just to get to it, like I think the main bone of contention that your dad has in the book is with this group called Nova. And I was wondering kind of what influence and power do they have like internationally or in the European Union in like disseminating information to government or the population on eating guidelines because your dad has an issue with how they categorize ultra processed food and putting like healthy foods that people should be eating in the same category as like very, high junk food essentially. So I was wondering if you
Yeah.
could give us a background on like what Nova is and what do they do?
Yeah, so Nova is, I mean, I'm not going to be able to give you the full, I don't actually know how influential they currently are on policymakers, but I can tell you certainly that Nova is the primary classification system that is used to describe processing of foods or the level of processing within foods. And it's the difficulty that Dad has with that, and I suppose for me, like it's as much a book about ultra processed foods as it is about food classification.
Right.
And as a layman, because I'm not a scientist, I'm not in this field, like, and I did edit the book, so I got really into the material. And obviously, I
Uh-huh.
listened to my dad rant about it for years before he
Right.
died as well. But the issue that he has is that the classification system itself is just shaky. Like it's really shaky. And then Nova is just one classification system used by people lobbying against ultra processed foods, but it's not the only one. And yet, if you compare it to the others, there's no consistency across all of them. And then there is
Mm.
no connection. As a result, like you can't do this if you don't have any decent science underpinning it. You can't then connect it to health outcomes in any kind of epidemiologically strong way. So that's the difficulty that Dad had is that Nova is a system which is quite arbitrary in its classifications, and potentially up to 75% of your caloric intake on a daily basis is going to be classified under the Nova system as ultra processed. So
Right.
if you were then to try and take out ultra processed foods from your diet, you're not going to be left with much. And you're certainly not going to be left with anything that is what we would consider to be convenient in today's society. And not all convenience food is bad. Like convenience is not bad. And I think
Right.
sometimes that gets mixed up in ultra processed. Like people just assume processed is convenience or, packaged to a certain
Mm.
degree, but that's not the case. Like, and really, in actual fact, what people are talking about in Nova is could be, and he gets into this in a way that I'm not going to be able to do any justice to
Right, right.
in this format, but it's actually more akin to reformulation. It's actually changing the formula of the food, what's in the food. So, for example, like we fortify flour, and that's why bread is always going to be considered ultra processed or
Mm.
processed, depending on which one you look at, because it has a product in it, flour, which has been fortified with additional nutrients. And that is done because it is a public health measure to make sure that we are getting nutrients into our body that we won't otherwise get. And the fortification of flour and now
Yeah.
milk and other products that we all take, and in many, many countries, these are all really positive public health measures, which should not come under the fire of a populist movement, which has decided that, it's bad to eat food that is what it describes as ultra processed. And
Hmm.
I think, ultimately for dad, like it's just he doesn't, and I think he gets this across very well in the book. He doesn't have an issue with people questioning public health advice and coming up potentially with something better, some better public health advice. But this is not it. Like this is not scientifically sound. It is not rigorously reviewed enough to be where it should be. And indeed, if you are going to look at new ways of shaping public health advice to incorporate more factors beyond just the nutrient intake that we have, then you should be looking at things like sustainability, the climate, lots of different things, which is actually a much more complex task than just dropping into kind of food classification systems. And until you have that other system, then what we have works very well because the food pyramid is a simple concept. And it's the food pyramid in some countries. In other countries, it's a food plate where they kind of divide it. But it gives you an easy to communicate public health message, which says that you need less carbs and more, I don't even know, but protein. Like it sorts it out into much more easily understandable categories of food that help us determine that we've got just about the right kind of balance on our plate or in our daily intake that's not going to jeopardize our health. And so that's kind of that was, I think, really for me, the underlying message of this is public health advice is working and it is easy to understand and it is based in good science. If you're going to propose something new, then first of all, it needs to be much more evidence based and it just needs to be better science. But also, if you really if you have that ambition to bring us to a new level of advice in public health consumption of food, then it needs to be include a lot more things as well.
Right, it's so multifaceted and complex, right? It kind of
Yeah.
reminds me of like the opposite of the this psychological thing called the Dunning-Kruger effect. Like
Oh yeah,
if somebody's not an expert, they'll tell you this is exactly how it is. This is the way you need to go. And somebody who's an expert in their field will tell you, no, it's far more nuanced and complex than that. And there's no one size fits all, which I think is
yeah,
kind of like what your dad is saying. But just to come back to what we were talking about in fortification of food, your dad used the example in the book of like neural tube defects many years ago. They
that's
put
right.
like
Yeah,
folic acid in bread,
yeah,
for I think it was the US population, and they measured the incidence of neural tube defects in babies, and they were really, really lower thereafter because food had been fortified. And actually, funny, I only recently did my first time I ever really got my blood panels done, so like vitamins and minerals and everything. And I'm 99% plant-based, and I do not
mhm.
take a B12 supplement, and my B12 was off the charts because I'm drinking a lot of plant-based milks and nutritional yeast that has been fortified with B12.
Excellent.
So
Yeah,
it's kind of amazing, yeah. So the government, they or the bodies, they put a lot of these good stuff in foods that we're already eating and may be classified as ultra processed. So that's
exactly.
clearly not
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, yeah, because there are things that have been done over long periods of time to address, dietary shortfalls and dietary gaps that we know are going to have bad outcomes. So yeah, exactly that. Like, and that's fab that you've met it through your own and some achievement to be so plant-based. Well done.
Yeah, no, I was just surprised to see it was off the Richter scale
Yeah.
almost how much B12 was there. So it was kind of funny because
Yeah.
that's naturally enough the question people ask, like, what's your iron levels like, what's your B12, etc. So, and that
Yeah.
was only thanks to the fortification that I almost wasn't even aware that I was getting. So there you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, I try to live my life by some food rules that maybe I wonder what you think of. Like maybe they're very simplistic heuristics about like what food choices to make.
Yeah.
So one of them would be like buying foods without a label, buying foods with maybe refrain from buying foods with ingredients that you can't understand. Buying
Yeah.
foods nowadays that if your grandmother didn't recognize it, maybe it's best to avoid. Buying foods with a long shelf life, maybe better to buy fresher type foods. But they're I know very simplistic things. But if people could follow that advice, I think we'd probably see a lot lower incidence of chronic health, obesity, etc. But that is a very simplistic kind of guideline.
Yeah, I mean, I am not in a position to comment on those kind of as principles to eat by, except to say that like Dad would push back on a lot of those. Like, absolutely, James. Like, there's no question. I mean, for example, not understanding what's in your food, like the detail of the compounds that are in your food that are required in food labeling mean that there are descriptions that we're not always going to be able to understand, And I mean,
Mhm.
they probably had different names and then they were classified in different ways and have, long scientific sounding names. But again, like, so Dad was involved in the EU food science committees and kind of the development of numbers, for example. And
Right.
like, so Dad was on the committee basically that looked at different compounds and categorized them in different ways. And like, oh, so you might be familiar with red lemonade, are you? From red lemonade?
Yeah,
No?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Like, so it's only found in Ireland. And I remember
Okay.
Dad coming home and telling us after one Brussels trip that he had saved red lemonade because a particular food coloring that was in red lemonade was on the chopping block,
No
uh
way.
and he managed to save it, red lemonade. So, one of his it should have been on his CV, I reckon. But anyway, like the thing is, like, there isn't actually evidence that because a compound, which is probably, like there's just the tiniest amount of it
Right.
in a bottle of red lemonade, has any negative impacts on us. And that's the difficulty I have with that simplistic, as you say, advice is, and also things like, shelf life, like, again, it kind of goes against then the idea that a lot of the developments we see in food technology and food production are actually really helpful in allowing people to access food
Mm.
who wouldn't otherwise be able to access that range or
Mm.
at certain times a year because of things like short shelf life. And
Right.
so saying that food is just bad because it has a long shelf life, I think is too simplistic. Like, but
Yeah,
again,
for
I am
sure.
not a nutritionist. I do not have the qualifications to offer
No, I
uh,
appreciate that. And only after
advice
saying
on
it to
that.
you, I realized like how reductive and maybe like, just almost a privilege it is to buy
Yeah,
and live by those rules.
exactly.
So,
Yeah. I mean, and the thing is, like, now there's so much, like there is so much online, there's so many influencers, there are so many people in this space. And again, like, Dad didn't resent that, like, even though it shamed, because Dad was always a nutritionist, a professor of human nutrition or a nutritionist. And I think he started calling himself a professor of human nutrition when the term nutritionist became much more popularized, if you like, and people can now qualify to be a nutritionist after quite a different qualification than Dad would have had, as in like a undergraduate degree and then a PhD. So people can do different types of courses and call themselves sports nutritionists or whatever it may be. And like, again, like, I don't think Dad really resented that was kind of in any way cheapening his profession or, but all he had an issue with was like, don't give advice about food if you don't understand it or if you're not relying on good science. Like, if you're going to espouse to people that they should only eat food that their grandmother could prepare, like, you have to be able to tell me why. And if you don't have a double blind randomized trial with peer reviews up the wazoo, like, then I'm sorry, but like, that is not healthy advice to give to people. It's not appropriate
yeah.
advice to give to people. So like, I think he welcomed and embraced, and I do too, that there's so much more discussion of what we eat and our food chain. And I mean, like, I referenced it earlier, but I would be much more excited about any kind of, you know, policy design and food advice that actually took into account the climate crisis, because I think that is a much more challenging frontier, really. And I mean, Dad references it a little bit in this book, and Eileen, my sister, who completed the last chapter, she kind of touches on it because I mean, that's a bigger problem with the climate crisis. We are going to see food shortages and challenges to traditional farming that are going to require us to innovate. And I think that's the kind of space where we need to be putting our energy, not,
Mm.
fretting over, the food miles of a product. I mean, and again,
Yeah.
see, food miles is connected to the climate, right? But, we live in a globalized world and it's not going to stop overnight. So, like here in Ireland, like if we stopped importing food, like we would be back to spuds,
We wouldn't
I
have a
mean,
whole lot of things.
yeah, spuds and beef, like, but
Sure.
yeah, so I think it is so complex, it's so intricate,
Mm.
and what was advised 10 years ago no longer stands because of the new challenges that we face as a society, I think. So again, like it brings you back to that, okay, well, we know that this basic stuff works around, for example, the balance of nutrients within our diet. We know that that's a healthy way to think about it, that's not going to lead to big obesity issues or undernutrition or malnutrition. So let's hold on to those ones that we know to be fast and true whilst we innovate and get to new places on other public health advice measures. Yeah.
Sure, yeah, it really is a field in its infancy when you think about it. Like we know so much more than we
Yeah.
did 50 years ago, and likewise in 50 years from now, as you say, we might have a completely different conception and understanding and
Yeah.
advice about what actually works and what people need, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it's like some of there's a chapter on hyperpalatability, for example,
Mm.
because that's one of the things that people talk about in relation to ultra processed foods and food addiction
Mm.
and addictive foods, like foods that
Mm.
make you want to come back and have more and more, and also foods that taste so good apparently in your mouth that it's they drive you to eat the same product again and again and
Yeah.
again. And that's again, like there just is not scientific rigor behind that. Like these are terms that are now bandied about, but they do not actually, like nobody can describe them in the same way.
Right.
And
That's actually
hyperpalatability.
an assumption that was really challenged with me because I thought food addiction
Mhm.
was a real thing because obviously overweight and obesity being like an international epidemic at this point. But actually, the way your dad defines it, there is no such thing as food addiction. What can you
No.
isolate that is the addicting factor? And it doesn't meet the DSM or whatever definition of what addictive really
Yeah.
is, right? So I guess
Yeah.
it's a conglomerate of like lots of other things, the environment the person is in, their socioeconomic status, the
Yeah.
availability of foods, all those things. It's not as simplistic as they're just addicted and cannot stop eating.
Yeah, exactly. And like, that's not to say that more people don't have issues dealing with their cravings for food. And I
Mm.
suspect they're the same type of people who also have addiction, uh, difficulties with substances, for example. Like, but it's to say that you can, and I think it's so dangerous to talk about food addiction because when we have a culture where so many young women, for example, and not just young women, but primarily young women end up with eating disorders to posit even the concept of food addiction, I think gives people a place to go, oh God, well, I have to kind of, it's all or nothing. You know what I mean? Like, so I
Mm.
think those are
Yeah.
the kind of ones that's where you get into really dangerous territory. And also, like, you start to take the enjoyment out of food. Like, I mean, the dad wrote, well, first of all, actually, because I don't know if that's a particular area of interest for you, like his last popular science book before this one was called Ever Seen a Fat Fox? And it is a book about obesity. So it's all about public health and obesity, basically, and ways that we might tackle it. And it really was around that time that sugar tax was getting popularized that he decided to write that one. And he talks about the fact that we live in an obesogenic environment now. Like we live in an environment where food is all around us. We also have much more sedentary lifestyles. So it
Mm.
is, there are much bigger societal currents that are driving the
Mm.
increase in obesity than just food. It is much more lifestyle and culture related, I think is really what he's trying to say in that book. And therefore the measures to address it must be more complex and holistic in how they treat it. Like Dad wanted to set up like, I think if he'd have maybe had a bit longer in his career in terms of like he did some public health or public sector work. He was chair of the Food Safety Authority here, for example, here in Ireland. And as I mentioned, he did a lot of EU work. But I think he would love to have seen an agency for obesity, like a basically a state agency, which brought together all of the different departments who needed to tackle obesity. And I think he was interested in like, almost like a tidy towns model, an active town kind of like ways in which whole communities together tackle obesity. But Dad was also very careful about the stigma and shame that is associated with obesity and how kind of in measures that we promote or put out there to tackle obesity, we're not making people feel even worse about themselves for being obese or
Right.
just being overweight, indeed. Like there's so much stigma and discrimination against people. And this is an area that I kind of got interested in. I'm now a politician, but I used to work in the human rights and equality space. And um, we were looking at kind of discriminatory law and where it was going. And one of the areas where I think people are discriminated against in law is because they are fat, like, and like in jobs, in like societally, we really, and Dad had some really interesting research around this. Like I remember
Mm.
him telling me about like some research he'd seen where they'd show kids a montage of 6 pictures. So a kid with a facial disfigurement, a kid with a broken leg, like in a wheelchair, a kid with a different skin color to them, and a kid who was fat. And then they would ask them basically, who's the last one you want to have as your friend? And like 95% was the fat kid. Like it is just like the way we think about, and we make assumptions about people who are obesity that they are less intelligent, that they are lazy, that they are unfit. And like I know there are like, ways in which physical exercise is affected, but actual fitness is not as affected by obesity as people consider it. Like that is not the case. And indeed, if you're skinnier, you're much more likely to be unfit than you are if you carry a bit of extra weight, for example,
Oh.
regardless of if you stretch into the obesity space. So there's a lot there, I think, in that obesity thing. That sorry, now I've gone off on a bit of a tangent, but
No,
I
that's really
certainly would
fascinating.
recommend.
Yeah.
It is fascinating. And it's, like I love the body positivity movement at the moment. I think it's wonderful to see women embracing all shapes and sizes. And I really admire, like my daughter's 25, and I just admire her peer group who are much, much more quick to celebrate curves. They don't talk in the same way that my generation did and do about our bodies, about the shame we carry for not conforming to these just ridiculously unrealistic standards of body shape. So I think there's a lot of positivity out there, but then there's backlash to that. And there is still so much in society where we just make horrible assumptions about people who carry weight. And like most people can't accurately define what obesity is. Never mind how to fucking how to deal with it, pardon me. Um, and then the other book, which I think, so between Ever Seen a Fat Fox and this one in Defense of Bread, the other book that Dad wrote is one called Food Through the Ages. And after his retirement, like Dad got really into cooking food. I mean, he was always enjoyed cooking food, but he got much more into it and just enjoying kind of exploring different cuisines from different parts of the world. And he would wreck your head now. You'd go to the gaff and he would like just spend an hour talking to you about where salt came from or just some other, like just got so into tomatoes or whatever it might be. But I think like he enjoyed, I think, in his retirement, looking at food from a different angle, not just from the kind of public health advice and scientific view of food, but also from the view of a more kind of anthropological almost or historical understanding of food and how we as humans interact with food. Like, and he references some of it in this book. Like he talks about the fact, for example, that it's only humans that snack. It's only humans that kind of dine in the way that we do. Like animals eat and humans dine. Like we go to Michelin starred restaurants and have tasting courses which celebrate food in a way that is just beyond sophisticated. And so I think like so I guess maybe that's a really long way to getting back to kind of some of that advice. Like it makes food seem bad. Like it makes it seem like it's something that we need to be cautious of. And, like it almost vilifies, I think, and this is not, maybe this is me talking now, not Dad, but like, whereas I think actually, like, I mean, I am an absolute foodie. Like, I love restaurants, I love cooking, I love baking. I've just finished my batch of speculoos biscuits for my work colleagues for Christmas, and I just love food and I love eating, and I challenged. I have a difficult time with my own weight. I yo-yo a bit, but I've kind of got it to like a smaller and smaller band in which I yo-yo. And I will discipline myself for a few months to get back, and then I'll let go a little for a few months. And that's just where I've found myself. Probably isn't the healthiest, but you know what? It's not that bad, and it's where I'm at. But I did like, I mean, I at one stage lost four stone in the case of a few months when I first kind of properly addressed that I had got a bit overweight. But like, I
Right.
mean, the thing is, like, I think I probably was categorized as obese, but most people would not have considered me so because I just carried weight all over my body, But so yeah, like it's just so complex and there's so much in it. Like,
Yeah, I
are
think
you
as
a
your dad,
foodie? Do you cook?
sorry. Yeah, no, I love cooking. Yeah, no, big. I actually studied food science back in the day, and I think
Yes.
your sister Eileen was actually my lecturer at one point. So,
Oh,
yeah, big
cool.
into the whole food world. Yeah, like
Yeah.
as your dad says, like you can't kind of isolate the nutrient from the food from the
Yeah.
diet, and the diet from the lifestyle. You have to kind of include. There's so many different moving parts, different variables. It's hard to like pin down exactly, what the problem might be and how to go by rectifying it.
Yeah.
But Sinead, I'm mindful that you're actually, working in the government buildings, and we'll say hypothetically, if you had a magic wand and you could change something overnight about the food regulation or policy that Ireland has, or the advertising laws, or even food labeling, is there anything top
Mm.
down you think would have the biggest intervention on people's eating habits for the better?
God, I don't know. I don't actually, to be honest, because I mean, I am a politician, all right. And although I've worked with this particular book, it is not food and health, actually, generally, is not my specific area at the moment. My focus is on defense and AI and
Okay,
workers'
fascinating.
rights. So different kind of area altogether. Um, but I think it's about, I suppose this applies to how I think policy should be considered across any range of issues, and that is just that it should be a more longer term picture.
Mm.
Because I think what we see, unfortunately, with dietary advice or kind of policy around food and diet is that short term thinking, like sugar tax, and those kinds of measures. Where really, if we want to see any kind of long term change, then you have to invest in you know, thinking across departments, looking at society more broadly, because as we've just described, it's not going to be fixed by one measure in the Department of Health or the Department of Transport or wherever else. But like, if you want people to be more active across communities, whole communities, you have to think about that from every department. So it is, for me, I think just going beyond the next election cycle and thinking about what long-term change can we introduce in society and how do we start that process of change, not expecting to see results tomorrow, not expecting to see kind of electoral gain immediately, but instead to see about laying the foundation for real change that will make a difference in people's lives.
Right, totally. Yeah. No, it's not a simple answer, right?
Yeah, no, sorry.
Yeah, given your dad's background and being in the food industry and nutrition health for so many years, I was wondering if you were to take, when you were all gathered around a table when you were young, breakfast table, dinner table, is there anything that would be unique or different about what he would eat? Or does he like preclude any food group, or was it just kind of just a standard healthy
Yeah.
diet?
No, no. Like, and it was so funny because when we were growing up, like, because nutritionists, like, now people know the word nutritionist. They didn't always then. So you kind of had to sometimes explain it.
Right.
And then it would immediately be, oh God, you have to eat really healthy. Do you eat brown rice? Do you eat brown bread? Like, which was the epitome of health in the 80s,
Mhm.
healthy food. But like, dad was like one of the like dad was quite a big man and was not a proponent of healthy eating for himself like as in like just loved food and no so there was never and dad himself like he went to a dietitian regularly and he we as Gibneys like we all struggled with weight like and he did as well so he never looked at it that way. And no, like dad's advice always was every food is good for you in moderation. Like there's no food that is bad for you. It's just about moderation. And when people asked about the best advice for losing weight, he used to quote Dolly Parton and say, if you want to lose weight, you just take your head out of the slot bucket. Like, it's just like it's maths, it's about calories in and energy out. And if you have the balance wrong, if you're eating too much food and not doing enough activity, you're going to start and keep putting on weight. And he had great advice around like the way to try and lose weight. He used to say, don't ever start a diet on a Monday, for example. And, just basic stuff like don't put biscuits in a see-through jar. Like there's just ways that you can make it easier for yourself to succeed if you're trying to lose weight.
Totally.
Um, but they're the same kinds of things that, we all pick up here and there. And I think a lot of it comes down to your own kind of personal battles and your personal goals, I guess. So no, we were never the healthy family at all, believe me.
Interesting. No, very good. Yeah, I wasn't actually aware your dad did so much work on food labeling, and I was just
Yes.
wondering, I give advice to my parents. I'm like, look at the label; it's very high in fat, sugar, etc. Is there anything that your dad proposed that Ireland could do in terms of food labeling to make it more kind of conspicuous to the consumer that this is a healthy food or this is an unhealthy food? Because really, when I'm looking at food, I can only trust the macronutrient kind of
Mm.
breakdown. Everything else, high fiber, low sugar, etc., it's not to be trusted. So I was just wondering what your dad thought about the food labeling in Ireland.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be so up on that to be honest, except like I know he did have some frustrations with some of the claims on labeling and exactly like you've just described that, some of them become untrustworthy. So I think Dad would have always supported just greater regulation around food labeling. Like he was very involved in the development of food labeling, and
Oh,
I remember doing a summer job for him where I had to record like labels on food. He did one of the biggest databases of food labels in Irish supermarkets. It was a massive project. So like what he would be advocating for is, easy to understand labeling and, that calorie and nutrient table that a lot of us are familiar with now per package per 100 grams or whatever is just a
yeah,
really good tool I think that a lot of people can use. Beyond that, I think there's some healthy one or some helpful ones like in I think Marks and Spencer's and other supermarkets now do it where they have like a green indicator for like a positive nutrient level for whatever it might be, salt or carbs or whatever, right up to red for other ones. And he references some of these, I think, either in this book or other books as well. So for him, it was just like it is about easy to understand, accessible and clear and evidence-based, always evidence-based. Whereas, like some of the words that I think are used in the description of products are misleading to get us to think in certain ways when they're not really like, they might not be kind of they're just, yeah, I think that kind of misleading language he would have pushed back against. I can't think of an example now.
yeah. Well, it's like kind of like the high protein kind of trend. Like they were slapping
Yeah,
that on like milk, and milk has always been high protein, right? They didn't like add any extra in there, so it's just kind of like to compel consumers to buy it, I guess, because it's a buzzword. And I actually remember
exactly.
seeing Mars, the chocolate bar in Mars
No.
with high protein labeled on it. So I'm sure it may have been high protein, but also had like a rake of sugar and fat and other things you don't want to eat as well. So the food
Yeah.
labeling is yeah, like a whole world unto itself, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I guess, I mean, if anything, it's about going to look at the actual table rather than the kind of any claims, because
Yeah,
that
they
word you could
can't
just
they can't lie about that, right?
exactly. Yeah, yeah. And I mean, maybe like that's the other thing is I don't know in the US, for example, I don't know. I don't think it's the same. And there's like I'm sure like there's different countries that do it better and innovate better in those spaces. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, Sinead, I really appreciate your time, but it'd be remiss of me if I didn't ask you about. I recently read Owen Murphy's book, Running from Office, and it was just a really interesting insight into like the burgeoning career or life of a politician. And I know you only recently kind of got into the whole game, so I was
Yeah.
wondering how's it going for you?
Well, good. Yeah, I'm not running from office just yet, thankfully, and I haven't read Owen's book, but I probably will at some stage. I love it. I absolutely love it. I have been absolutely privileged throughout my career to try a number of different areas. Like I worked in the corporate sector in tech, and I worked in the public sector in human rights and equality, as I said, and now politics. And I just, yeah, like I feel it was kind of what I was born to do. I just love the excitement of it, and I love being able to really spend time thinking about and speaking about and developing policy on the most challenging issues of our time. And like I mentioned earlier, defense and AI are kind of where my focus is at the moment. And AI in particular and digital policy and technology is an area I'm really interested in. I've always believed that technology can be used for social good. Right now, I don't think it is largely doing that. I think social media and the stranglehold that the tech platforms have on our lives and our minds is quite worrying. And then what
Yeah.
AI is bringing down the track is even more scary. So I think, and law and policy are just catching up. So, or not even catching up, but they're certainly not in front of
Mhm.
it. And that's a dangerous place to be. So yeah, like I love it. I love the people side of it. I'm tired, I can tell you. It is an exhausting game. Like I did last Wednesday, I was in work by 7:30 and I didn't leave until 10 past 1 in the morning. Like I went from the Dáil to a TV studio, did an hour's late night TV studio and still went back because we hadn't finished voting.
My
Like it's
goodness.
just incredibly punishing, like as a
Yeah,
schedule.
it's just
And
relentless.
I
Like I remember him saying, like it's kind of like equating it to being a priest. You're never not a priest. You're always a politician.
exactly.
You're always out there doing stuff in the public,
Yeah.
domain. And people like approach you and just like talk
Yeah,
about.
yeah. And that's nice because like, mostly people who approach you are people who like you. And that's a good counterbalance because you get a lot of shit online and you really do as a woman now in particular, you get a lot of really nasty stuff. So it's really nice that people come up and tell you you're doing a great job but maybe a little harder is kind of just socializing because everybody wants to talk about stuff and everybody's seen you, like seen me
Right.
talk about things. So they might like today I met a friend for coffee who I haven't seen in a couple of years, like and she was asking me about defense, and I'm quite a strong proponent of neutrality and retention of the triple lock, which is our kind of UN mandate on peacekeeping. And I'm pushing back a lot against what is an increasingly dominant militarization narrative here in Europe, and people are not that cool with that. And she was just quite, vociferous, and it's like, yeah, I have to be able to like, and I do like kind of, hashing it out with people, but I also just sometimes you just want to stop, like you just
Yeah,
want to
totally.
talk about food for an
Just talk
hour.
about bread. Yeah, no, totally. I think it's wonderful what you're doing, and we need more people like you. I
Thank you.
think it's awesome, really, just giving your life to one cause and just giving it socks. So,
Thanks
no,
so
thank you
much,
so much for
James.
being with me, Sinead. And if you could just
My
tell people
pleasure.
where they could get the book in Defense of
So
Bread.
Amazon is the only place you can get it. Well, it's not the only place you can get it, but online anyway. So, and it is available at the moment in paperback, in ebook, and in the next couple of days, I expect we'll have the audiobook uploaded as well. So all of those formats are available on Amazon. It probably won't be in stores necessarily, so it's probably online is the best place to look for it. But it
Awesome, you're
depends. We
doing it
don't
in
know yet.
audiobook. That's amazing.
Yeah, yeah, that was great. Like I think because so many people, that's how they access it, and particularly this type of book, I think people will
Hmm.
enjoy in an audiobook format. So I'm a traditionalist myself, but apparently it's all the rage.
Right, right, right. Listen, Sinead, it's been a joy talking to you. Thank you so
Likewise.
much, and
Thank
yeah,
you.
keep doing what you're doing.
Thanks, James. See you again.
Okay,
All the
yeah.
best.